Cleopatra has an enduring fascination for us because her story embodies power and beauty and the rise and fall of dynasties.
Hollywood sold us Cleopatra as a face. Rome sold her as a seductress. Modern debates tried to turn her into a racial argument. But the truth hiding behind Cleopatra is darker, colder, and far more impressive. Because the DNA that was supposed to reveal her face did something else entirely. It proved how badly history has been looking at the wrong woman. The woman Hollywood invented. For more than 2,000 years, Cleopatra has been treated less like a ruler and more like a costume. The black eyeliner, the gold jewelry, the dramatic entrance, the dangerous beauty, the woman powerful men supposedly destroyed themselves to possess. That is the Cleopatra Hollywood loves because it is easy. It turns one of the sharpest political minds of the ancient world into a beautiful trap, a queen who conquered Rome with perfume, silk, and eye contact. But that version was never history. It was propaganda with better lighting. The real Cleopatra was not famous in her own time because she looked like a movie star. Ancient writers who disliked her still admitted the power was not just in her appearance. It was in the way she spoke, the way she listened, the way she made people feel like every word had been designed for them alone. She was educated, multilingual, politically ruthless, and born into a dynasty where survival was never guaranteed. She did not inherit a stable kingdom and sit on a golden throne waiting for Roman generals to fall in love with her. She inherited a collapsing family business surrounded by enemies, debts, famine, rebellion, Roman pressure, and siblings who could become executioners overnight. That is the first lie Hollywood told. Cleopatra was not dangerous because she was beautiful. She was dangerous because she understood power better than the men who kept underestimating her. Rome looked at her and saw temptation. Hollywood looked at her and saw a romance. But Egypt saw something else. Egypt saw its last real chance to remain independent. And that is where the DNA story changes everything. Because the closer science gets to Cleopatra's world, the less she looks like the fantasy people keep trying to sell. The DNA that did not belong to her. The most dramatic DNA twist in Cleopatra's story did not come from Cleopatra herself. That is the part most people get wrong. Her tomb has not been confirmed. Her body has not been recovered. There is no verified sample of Cleopatra's DNA sitting in a lab, quietly rewriting every textbook. But science did examine a set of remains that many people hoped would bring us closer to her. The bones linked to her killed sister, Arsinoe IV. For years, the octagon tomb in Ephesus seemed like it might hold the answer. Arsinoe was Cleopatra's younger sister and political rival, a girl dragged through Roman triumph and later killed in Ephesus after Cleopatra and Mark Antony made sure she could never threaten the throne again. If the skeleton in the octagon belonged to Arsinoe, then suddenly researchers would have something close to Cleopatra's genetic world. Not Cleopatra's own body, but a bloodline clue, a biological witness from the same royal house. And then science ruined the perfect documentary ending. The skull was studied again, using modern methods, and the story collapsed. The remains were not Arsinoe. They were not Cleopatra's sister. They belonged to an adolescent boy, around 11 to 14 years old, with serious developmental problems and ancestry pointing toward the Italian peninsula or Sardinia. The body that was supposed to unlock Cleopatra's identity opened a completely different mystery instead. The sister she could not spare. To understand Cleopatra, you have to understand the kind of family she came from. This was not a royal household in the fairy tale sense. This was a dynasty where brothers married sisters, sisters raised armies against brothers, fathers were chased from the throne, and children learned very early that blood did not make anyone safe. In the Ptolemaic world, family was not protection. Family was the first battlefield. Arsinoe IV was not just a helpless younger sister standing in Cleopatra's shadow. She became a rival queen during the Alexandrian War. While Julius Caesar and Cleopatra were trapped in Alexandria, Arsinoe was aligned with forces fighting against them. For a moment, this teenage princess was not a footnote. She was a real threat. Rome saw her, Egypt saw her, Cleopatra saw her, and in Cleopatra's world, a rival with royal blood was never just a person. A rival with royal blood was a future rebellion waiting to happen. That is why Arsinoe's death matters so much. She had taken refuge at the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, a sacred place where she should have been safe. But politics does not respect sanctuary when a throne is on the line. Mark Antony had her killed in 41 BCE, and ancient sources place Cleopatra behind the move. It was brutal, but it was also completely consistent with the world Cleopatra had been born into. The Ptolemies did not survive by being gentle. They survived by removing threats before those threats matured. This is where Hollywood fails again. It wants Cleopatra's danger to come from seduction, but the real danger was colder. She was a political animal raised inside a cage of knives. She could charm, yes, but she could also calculate. She could speak like a goddess and move like a survivor. The death of Arsinoe tells you that Cleopatra was not simply fighting Rome. She was fighting every possible version of Egypt that did not have her at the center of it. The family tree that folded in on itself. Cleopatra belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Macedonian Greek ruling family that took Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great. By Cleopatra's time, the Ptolemies had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, but they did not rule like ordinary kings. They built themselves into a divine family. They used Egyptian religious imagery, Greek royal culture, and dynastic marriage to make their bloodline seem separate from everyone else's. Over time, that separation became literal. The Ptolemies often married inside the family, brother to sister, uncle to niece, cousin to cousin. The point was not romance, it was power. A royal woman marrying outside the dynasty could carry legitimacy into another family. A royal man marrying outside the dynasty could invite another faction into the throne room. But if the family kept marrying itself, then power stayed sealed inside the bloodline. It was political control dressed as sacred tradition. That kind of family system creates an ugly question. What did it do to Cleopatra's body? Some people online turn this into a horror story immediately, claiming she must have been deformed, broken, or genetically doomed. But the truth is more complicated. We do not have Cleopatra's body. We do not have her medical chart. We cannot diagnose her from a family tree alone. What we can say is that her dynasty practiced close-kin marriage, and that modern scholars have debated whether some Ptolemies showed signs of inherited health problems. But the more interesting point is not whether Cleopatra looked damaged. The more interesting point is that she does not appear in history as damaged at all. She appears as active, disciplined, intelligent, persuasive, and almost impossible to ignore. If her family tree was a biological trap, then her life was an act of resistance against it. She was born from a dynasty that kept folding inward, but she turned herself outward. She learned languages. She studied politics. She performed Egyptian kingship better than many of her Greek ancestors. She became not just the daughter of the Ptolemies, but the first one in generations who seemed to understand Egypt itself. The queen who became Egyptian on purpose. This is the part Hollywood almost never gets right. Cleopatra was not simply Egyptian in the way the movies imply, and she was not simply Greek in a way that erases what she chose to become. She was born into a Macedonian Greek dynasty, ruling Egypt from Alexandria, a city that was Greek, Egyptian, Jewish, Roman, African, Mediterranean, and completely unique. Her native language was Greek. Her ruling house came from the world of Alexander. But Cleopatra did something her predecessors were famous for not doing. She learned the Egyptian language. That detail changes her entire story. The earlier Ptolemies ruled Egypt, but many of them did not truly speak to Egypt. They governed through Greek administration and royal symbolism. Cleopatra went further. She embraced Egyptian religious identity. She associated herself with Isis. She appeared as Pharaoh. She understood that if she wanted to hold Egypt together against Rome, she could not just be a Greek queen sitting on an Egyptian throne. She had to become the living bridge between the dynasty and the country it ruled. That is the new storyline. Cleopatra's true identity was not a blood test. It was a political construction. She made herself Egyptian because Egypt was the source of her legitimacy. She made herself divine because divinity was the language of kingship. She made herself irresistible, not because of beauty alone, but because she could become whatever the moment required. To Egyptians, she could be Isis. To Greeks, she could be a Hellenistic monarch. To Romans, she could be an ally, a threat, a lover, or a nightmare. That was her genius. She was not one simple identity. She was a throne that knew how to speak in many languages. That is what modern arguments often miss. People keep asking whether Cleopatra was this or that, as if ancient identity worked like a modern checkbox. But Cleopatra lived in a world where ancestry, language, city, religion, dynasty, and political performance all mattered at once. Her power came from the fact that she understood that better than anyone around her. She did not wait for people to define her. She weaponized definition itself. The Roman smear campaign. If Hollywood lied about Cleopatra, Rome wrote the first draft. After Cleopatra and Mark Antony lost to Octavian, the man who would become Augustus, Rome needed a story that made the civil war look clean. Octavian could not simply say he had defeated another Roman faction in a brutal power struggle. That sounded too much like civil war. So the story became something easier to sell. Rome had not fought Rome. Rome had fought the foreign queen, who corrupted Antony. That is how Cleopatra became a monster in Roman imagination. Not just a ruler, a seductress, a witch, an Eastern danger, a woman who made Roman men forget themselves. It was politically useful to make Antony look weak and Cleopatra look poisonous. If Antony had made his own choices, then Rome had to admit its heroes could be ambitious, greedy, and unstable. But if Cleopatra had enchanted him, then Rome could blame the woman. This propaganda lasted because it was dramatic. A brilliant queen, using diplomacy, wealth, navy, language, and dynastic strategy, is complicated. A beautiful woman destroying men with her sexuality is simple. So that is the version that survived in plays, paintings, films, and popular memory. Every century dressed her in its own fantasy, but the basic Roman accusation remained the same. Cleopatra was too powerful, so her power had to be explained as manipulation. But once you strip away that smear campaign, the story becomes more impressive. Cleopatra was dealing with the most dangerous political machine in the world. Rome was expanding, consuming kingdoms, turning allies into clients and clients into provinces. Egypt was rich, but vulnerable. Its grain fed the Mediterranean. Its treasury mattered. Its location mattered. Cleopatra knew that if she could not manage Rome, Rome would eventually manage Egypt. Her relationships with Caesar and Antony were not just romances. They were foreign policy conducted at the highest possible level. Taposiris Magna and the tomb that refuses to speak. This brings us to the underground part of the story, the place where legend, archaeology, and obsession all meet. For years, archaeologist Kathleen Martinez has searched for Cleopatra's tomb at Taposiris Magna, a temple site west of Alexandria. Many scholars remain skeptical. They argue Cleopatra was more likely buried in Alexandria, possibly in an area now lost or underwater. But Martinez has kept digging, and the site has produced discoveries that are difficult to ignore. The most cinematic discovery was the long tunnel carved beneath the temple, stretching more than a kilometer underground. Add to that the coins connected to Cleopatra, the ISIS-related temple context, elite burials, gilded mummies, and more recent reports of a submerged port near the site, and you can understand why the search keeps pulling people back. It feels like the ground is refusing to give a final answer, but keeps dropping clues just strong enough to keep the obsession alive. And that is what makes Cleopatra different from almost every other ancient figure. Her absence is active. Most missing tombs simply disappear into history. Cleopatra's tomb feels like it is still negotiating with us. Every coin, every tunnel, every underwater structure, every burial near her era becomes part of the argument. Is she there? Is she still in Alexandria? Was her body hidden to protect it from Roman humiliation? Or has the sea already taken the final proof? The competitor version of this story turns the tomb into a horror movie, but the better version is more haunting because it is more human. Cleopatra knew exactly what Rome did to defeated enemies. She had seen humiliation used as political theater. She knew her sister had been paraded. She knew Octavian wanted a symbol. If she could not win the war, she could still control the final image. Death became her last political act. The missing tomb may not just be an archaeological mystery, it may be Cleopatra's final victory over Rome. The face behind the coins. We may not have Cleopatra's DNA, but we do have her coins. And those coins are important because they are not trying to satisfy modern beauty standards. They show a strong profile, a hooked nose, a prominent chin, a face built for authority more than softness. Some people look at those images and say, that does not look like Hollywood. Exactly. It was never supposed to. Ancient royal portraits were not selfies. They were political messages stamped into metal and pushed through an empire. Cleopatra's image on a coin was not asking to be desired. It was demanding to be recognized. The nose, the chin, the severe profile, the masculine edge, some viewers notice, all of it worked as power language. She was not advertising vulnerability. She was advertising rule. This is where the title becomes true in a deeper way. Hollywood got it wrong because Hollywood was looking for beauty where it should have been looking for authority. Cleopatra did not need to look like Elizabeth Taylor or any modern actress to be captivating. Her charisma was not trapped in her face. It lived in voice, timing, intelligence, fluency, wealth, ceremony, and the terrifying confidence of a woman who knew how to turn herself into a symbol. And maybe that is why people are so desperate for her DNA. They want science to settle what art and propaganda have distorted. They want a face, a category, a final answer. But Cleopatra keeps refusing the simple version. Her coins do not give us a beauty queen. The octagon DNA does not give us her sister. Taposiris Magna does not yet give us her tomb. Every new discovery seems to say the same thing. You are not going to understand her by reducing her. So what has DNA actually revealed about Cleopatra? Not her skin color, not her exact face, not whether she looked like a Hollywood queen or a Roman nightmare. The real revelation is that the modern obsession with her body has distracted from the real story of her power. Even when science does not find her, it exposes the assumptions people bring to the search. When researchers hoped the octagon skeleton was Arsinoe, people were ready to build entire arguments on it. When the DNA showed it was a young boy instead, the story became more honest. We do not have the shortcut. We do not get to solve Cleopatra by borrowing another body. We have to deal with her through history, politics, language, archaeology, propaganda, and the world she actually lived in. And that makes her more impressive, not less. Cleopatra was not a passive mystery, waiting for modern science to explain her. She was an active strategist who spent her life controlling how people saw her. She used Egyptian religion, Greek monarchy, Roman diplomacy, motherhood, wealth, ceremony, and performance as tools. She understood image in a way that feels almost modern. She knew that power is not only what you have, power is what people believe you are. That is the terrifying truth Hollywood missed. Cleopatra was not simply the woman men wanted, she was the woman men feared being outplayed by. Caesar did not align with her because she was pretty. Antony did not build an Eastern strategy around her because she wore nice eyeliner. Octavian did not spend so much energy destroying her reputation because she was harmless. Rome attacked her image because her image had power. If Cleopatra could remain a legitimate queen, a mother of Caesar's son, an Isis figure, and a rival center of authority, then Rome's version of the future was not safe. The last pharaoh was a survivor, not a fantasy. The word survivor matters here. Cleopatra survived a family that devoured itself. She survived exile. She survived war inside her own capital. She survived Roman pressure long enough to rebuild her position again and again. She lost in the end, but losing to the machine that became the Roman Empire does not make her weak. It makes the length of her resistance more remarkable. For 21 years, she ruled Egypt in a world where most people expected her to be removed, controlled, married off, or killed. She had children not only as a mother, but as a strategist building possible futures. Caesarion linked her to Caesar. Her children with Antony linked her to a larger Eastern dream. Every alliance she made was personal and political at the same time. That is not romance replacing statecraft. That is romance being used as statecraft. And this is why the Hollywood got it wrong angle should not only be about appearance. Hollywood got her category wrong. Cleopatra was not a love interest in Rome's story. Rome was a threat in hers. She was not the exotic distraction that pulled men away from serious politics. She was one of the serious political players. She was not a footnote to Caesar and Antony. They were chapters in her attempt to keep Egypt alive. That is the version of Cleopatra that actually deserves a film. Not the woman lounging on a barge, waiting to destroy men, but the queen sitting at the center of a collapsing world, calculating every move while Rome sharpened its knives. A woman born from a dangerous bloodline, ruling a wealthy kingdom, performing divinity, speaking multiple languages, eliminating rivals, bargaining with generals, and trying to stop Egypt from becoming another Roman possession. Cleopatra's DNA has not given us her face yet, but it has exposed the lie around her. She was never just beauty, race, romance, or scandal. She was strategy in human form. And when her tomb finally opens, the real shock may not be how she looked. It may be how small Hollywood made her.